Thank you all for being with us today. Really excited about this event as a way of celebrating the official Ask a Conservator Day of the American Institute of Conservation, about which you'll be hearing a bit later. We scheduled this talk for this date before we realized, but it seems rather smart of us now that we know. So this is a great chance to learn more about this fascinating, often secret and hidden profession of art conservation, what goes into this work, and you'll hear more about this very fortunate position that Olana is in as a small but feisty museum that has a really important art collection and has access to this statewide conservation resource at the Bureau of Historic Sites, where we have professional conservators who spend a lot of time and put in a lot of love caring for Olana's complex multimedia collections. So one of these people who knows the Olana collection like no other is our speaker today, Michele Phillips, who is the specialist in paper in particular. That medium in all its complexity has been her stock in trade, and she is a nationally recognized expert in all manner of paper conservation tasks. So she works at this acronym we talk about a lot around here, OPRHP, the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation in its Peebles Island State Park Resource Center. Her treatment specialty includes prints, drawings, and letters, and she's also done interesting work on wallpaper, large maps, and certainly photography, which will be one of our focuses for today. Michele Phillips is a professional associate of the American Institute for Conservation and an active member of the museum community, presenting at conferences of the International Council of Museums, at the Getty Center, the American Alliance of Museums, etc. She's heavily involved in local history organizations, including the American Association of State and Local History, and she is on the board of the Hart-Cluett Museum in her hometown, or her new hometown of Troy, New York. So this is somebody who is widely known both in our regional and national museum and conservation community, somebody we're very lucky to have on our side, diving deep into the challenges of caring for this complex collection. And she promises to give a little insight, some case studies into the things she's caring for up at Peebles Island. So if you turn on your camera there, Michele, we'd love to see you in your lab there up at Peebles and hear from you today. So take it away.
Here we go. Well, thanks, Will. I hope everybody can see me here at Peebles Island. Let me just step back so you can see this is my workspace. I'm pretty excited about sharing it with everybody today. This is my first webinar, so bear with me as we navigate things like sharing screens and stuff like that. I wanted to start off, now that you see where I am, because I don't want to be this little bobblehead up in the corner and you not understand where I am. Let me hit share screen, and we'll start off with the PowerPoint. There we go. So today I'm going to be talking to you about making it last. I like to call it the art and science of preserving paper and photographic collections at Olana. And I'm going to take you through a little journey. This is an example in this slide here of a sampling of what you're going to see. Typical works on paper. That's the facade drawing of Olana, of the south elevation. And then up in the right-hand corner is a sketchbook that Church used on his travels to Petra. And then on the lower left is an oil sketch, which a lot of people don't get to see. So I'm really excited about showing these to you, as well as Church owned a very extensive photograph collection. And again, that's another thing you'll learn why through this lecture, why you don't get to see them as prevalently as we would like because of how vulnerable they are. So to explain where this lab is, this lab is part of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. I work under the umbrella of the Division for Historic Preservation. Bear with me, it's a government agency, there's layers. So what you're seeing here is the website. And if you wanted more information on the Bureau of Historic Sites, you'd see you click right on here in the Parks website. There you would see the network of 37 historic sites that that are part of the park system. So I work for all 37 of those sites and some 210 historic parks, because the New York State Park System is one of the oldest park systems in the country. And majority of the parks are considered historic. They're quite old. So we are physically located at the confluence of the Hudson and Mohawk rivers. We're just above the Capital Region in Albany. It's about 6 miles away. And I work in this amazing warehouse complex that was formerly a textile factory. And so that's why it's called Peebles Island. We sometimes refer to ourselves as PI, and Peebles often comes out as Peoples, which is kind of a neat switch, but it's Peebles Island. So I often get asked, you're a conservator, so do you work in biology, ecology, with trees? And I said, well, kind of. As a paper conservator, I do in a way, but a very removed way. So conservation is a little too obscure for its own good. This is why I love doing these kinds of conversations, because I think I have one of the best jobs that you can have. So conservation is the combination of science, art, and history aimed at preserving the material and informational integrity of an object. Pretty wordy. When you're looking at an object, there's all this meaning, context, artistic intent, ideas and values are embodied in these artifacts. That's the curatorial side of things. I am involved in that curatorial side, but I'm more involved on the structural side. I'm looking at materials, fabrication methods, and the forensics, and how they inform the meaning, context, ideas, and values. So it's a real back and forth. And I work very, very closely with people like Will Coleman. I can't do my job without working within a teamwork situation of historians, art curators, exhibition specialists, and so on. So here's where I talk about, I'm just going to take you out of the agency for a minute. So conservation in North America, we are governed by our professional organization. It's the American Institute for Conservation. They are a great resource. Today is Ask a Conservator Day, and it was chosen to be November 18th in honor of the Florence floods that happened in the 60s. It's considered kind of the birthing of conservation as a very formal profession. So if you're ever looking for a conservator or want to find more information about conservation, this is your resource. It's culturalheritage.org. There are tons of resources there. There's levels of membership. And as Will explained, I'm a professional associate. So if you're ever looking for a conservator, that's how you find a conservator, because they list the different levels of membership so that you know you're dealing with a conservator, not somebody who happens to just be interested in conservation. So back to the lab. So again, the question I get is, what is conservation exactly? And I explain, well, I do chemical and physical treatments on artwork. I'm an art surgeon. I use the medical analogy a lot because people are still a little like, what do you mean chemical and physical treatments? So I fix things. This is me working in the lab years ago on a gouache, very similar to a gouache that's on a tour floor at Olana, but happened to be from another site. What you're seeing up there is the lab, a little more pared down than it is right now. What you're seeing, it's the same area as behind me, but I'm happy to say that we've been able to invest in analytical tools that I need to do my job. So yes, I fix things. I take documents that are in shattered states, torn and tattered, and I put them together. So that's my surgery side of my job. But I do more than just fix things. I have to work with the method and material science of an artifact so that I can help curators continue their research into the values and ideals of an artwork. So I do a lot of investigation and identification with analytical techniques and imaging tools. You see the microscope behind me. This is an example from Olana. This is iconic piece. This is Our Banner in the Sky. It is an oil on paper, and it turns out it's an oil over a print. And we know this because I put it under the microscope and I was able to find the print matrix. What you're seeing here are the oil, that's the brush strokes in the oil. But you see these little jelly bean black dots? That's the print matrix. We worked with a researcher on this object, and I could do a whole webinar on this artwork on its own, but I just wanted to use it to demonstrate how much time I spend at the microscope. Because this is the other way that we do investigation. We're starting to use, well, not starting, we've been using digital imaging quite extensively. And this is that same artwork. On the bottom right, you're seeing this one here. This is the oil over lithographic print. This is a gouache and lithographic print. And we were trying to figure out if these two prints were exactly the same. So what we did is we use infrared reflectography, which is a special type of, and if I'm oversimplifying it, it's taking a picture of the artwork in the dark with a very specific light source. And we're capturing what's underneath everything that's on the surface. And we prove that they are indeed exactly the same prints. So I'm taking all this forensics and material science and I'm fixing things. I'm using it to inform how I'm going to fix something that is damaged. But we're also using this information so that we can provide a good environment to slow down degradation. Our collections are organic. They will degrade. We can't make them stop degrading, but our goal is to slow that down as much as possible. And people are always asking me, what do I do? How do I keep things from degrading? It's chemistry. You want to slow down chemical reactions. So you don't want heat, you don't want a lot of moisture, and you want to protect it from other pollutants, and you want to protect it from light, which is a form of radiation that excites everything. So why, for paper, what makes paper so vulnerable? Because that recipe that I just described to you goes across every discipline for conservation. And what we have here at Peebles Island is we have conservators in just about every discipline for material works. We have a deck arts conservator, textile conservator, we have frame conservation and furniture conservation, and of course we have painting conservation, very important. And each one has their own very specific chemistry background for their specific objects. So I'm just warning you, I'm not going to give you a whole lot of chemistry, but you really need to understand just the basics of paper to understand what's going through my mind when we're trying to decide what to do with an artifact for longevity, or say for putting it on display, or for putting it into storage. So paper is really vulnerable because it's organic. It is, technically it's a carbohydrate. It is a very big molecule. It's a long chain. It has 26 reaction points on it. So paper's like a sponge. Each one of those red dots is a point, a chemical reaction point. If it gets subjected to pollutants, UV radiation, that kind of thing. And what you're seeing in the lower left corner is a scanning electron microscope. I love these images. I just love seeing the network of paper. This is paper at 200 times magnification. And you're really seeing how these fibers are bonding to create the substrate that we are using for artwork. So you have to think, as a conservator, I'm zooming down to the object and then coming back out of it. That's the best way to describe it. So for paper, storage, paper spends a lot of time in storage. And a good storage environment is one of the single most important things for paper to persevere through time. What you're seeing on the left is just a tiny sampling of the Works on Paper collection that is housed here in the other department that's managed by our collections management unit. And it was a tremendous amount of work. I'd like you to try to picture all of these materials at Olana in the spaces, in the attic, because that's where they were stored. They were, if you can imagine Frederick Church living with this volume of material in that house. That's something that I have to remind myself every time when I walk into storage, when I'm overwhelmed with the volume of it. I can't imagine what it was like when it was in the house. And the other thing that you're seeing in our storage is we have customized shelving for every type of different artifact. And while we do a lot of boxes for the Olana works, we also have an extensive number of paintings, and we have this wonderful condensed rack storage that you're seeing on the lower right. So storage is pretty straightforward. You get it in the right envelope, you get it in the right folder, you get it in the right box so that it's chemically protected and it's not subjected to light. But what do we do for display? Because paper is very, very light sensitive. This is why paper is almost always glazed. You rarely see paper without, like in a frame without glazing. If it doesn't have glazing, it's usually because the glazing was broken, or it's something massive like a wall map and it just hung unprotected. So when we're looking at display, we're always wondering, what are the boundary conditions? So for the tour floor, that's considered permanent display, which is really stressful on works on paper. So you can imagine all those pieces that were in the boxes, they were probably on tables. You know, think about all the paper you have in your life that ends up on your dining room table, then moves into a drawer and then moves its way through your life. When you're having a tour floor like this and you want to experience paper, the works on paper that you're seeing are in, like up here, you have some watercolor gouache. There's only a few works on paper really on the tour floor. And then you have this charcoal drawing here. So we're doing pretty well at Olana, but again, how you experience the tour floor is really influenced by the material sensitivity of the artwork, because we want to make sure that colors don't fade. We need to control the light damage. We need to control, you know, loose fingers moving around the tour floor. So that's why when you're visiting a historic house museum, you really have to take a grain of salt with the work that goes into making it so that you can have this wonderful experience. And it's not always ideal. It's often quite dark. And I know that that's a real challenge for people. And I apologize for that as a paper conservator, but you know that that darkness is going very, very far in preserving the material that you're looking at. So because we have that tension on the tour floor, and the fact that the tour floor is very dedicated to how Church lived with his artworks hanging on the walls. And like I said, the works on paper, he didn't have them on the walls like that. There's this great area that was developed. It's the Sharp Family Gallery on the second floor. And I breathe a sigh of relief when I'm preparing things for this space, because this space caters to the highly sensitive artworks. And this is the space where we can display all of these very fragile works that you would not be able to experience on the tour floor. And the other thing about this space is that you can get up close and personal to them, whereas on the tour floor, it's not intended for you to walk right up to an artwork on the wall. The tour floor is about the harmony of the context and the experience of the sum of the parts. Whereas in the Sharp Family Gallery, you get to experience individual artworks much more intimately. So this is just an example of how I do a tour, what I call a tour floor retrofit. These are angels. These are the young children that Church and Isabel lost early on. And this is a portrait by Rouse of the children. And this hangs up on the second floor bedroom. And it looks, this is before treatment. It looks pretty wonderful from the front. There's a little bit of water damage down below on the mat. But it really came to me because if you look at the back and you see all the wood backing board and the older papers, that wood backing board is actively working against the artwork. So we had to figure out a way that we could separate it so that we could keep the original artwork as chemically safe as possible, but reintegrate it back onto the tour floor. We wanted to maintain the artistic look of it as is. And so a lot of what I do is literally not seen because most of the work that was done on this was everything behind the drawing. It's a charcoal drawing. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is the fancy retrofitting I did with good quality mat board. There's a material in there that's like a desiccant to control the humidity levels in it. And we also did a sandwich with the period glass on the front and gave it UV protecting glass right behind it that is practically indetectable. So now this piece has all of its integrity, but is living as chemically good as it can be. So that's the subtlety of the tour floor work. Now, when I'm doing presentation for the gallery, we have this recipe because we want to make sure that the transition from the tour floor into the gallery, that you're still feeling that historic context and it's not your blank white box gallery. It's still a very pared down space, but it's a great transition space from the tour floor. And I can really work on providing the framing package that is needed and the light protection that is needed for extremely fragile things like the toned paper you're seeing just above the book on the left-hand side. The toned paper is very, very light sensitive, and we will lose that color. We could lose that color in the span of exhibition if the light levels aren't as low as they possibly can be. So I'm going to take you back to the lab. I do a lot of exhibition preparation for Olana, but back in the lab, I also get a lot of fun conservation. So I kind of chuckle about the fun conservation because it's very subtle. Most things that we do conservation-wise with paper, it's not the same as painting conservation. In painting conservation, you can make a painting that has had a hole in it look like it's never been punctured. Paper's not that forgiving. So there's only a few conservation treatments where the result is really wow. It's they're few and far between. And so this is one of my favorite treatments that I did in the lab. This was, Church has a number of graphite drawings that had this white gouache heightening. It's a form of watercolor. It's an opaque watercolor heightening. And you see how it just makes the image pop. It creates this contrast. So it's lead white is what's used. This is another forest scene, and I have a close-up for you so that you can see what's happening with the lead white. You can notice the lead white's looking a little muddy in this one. And if you look closely, you can see that the lead white is actually tinged orange. So what happens is lead white reacts with pollutants in the atmosphere or impurities in the paint. And the most egregious degradation that happens from this is darkening of the lead white. So here's an example. This is a drawing. You can see up in the clouds on the left-hand side, and I want you to pay attention to these little dots as well as this area here. So this is lead white that has changed form. It's gone dark. And there is a conservation treatment that feels like magic when we do it. We use a solution of hydrogen peroxide in a methylcellulose gel. And I'm indebted to the research that came before me by Margot McFarland. She taught me a lot about working with gels to convert the lead white that has darkened back to something white. It's not a reversion treatment. It's a chemical change. It doesn't revert it back to the sulfate. It actually changes it to lead sulfite, but it's pretty spectacular. So I just want to show you the time lapse that I did on this one. You can see I'm applying, then I'm removing. You see it's reacted. Now it's white. And the little pebbles are getting looked after and little dots. And there's the before and there's the after. So you can see this kind of treatment without this treatment, the aesthetic integrity of that drawing is completely compromised. It's so chemistry, the application of chemistry here has salvaged the aesthetic integrity so that we can now see the artwork for what it is and not see the damage. It's a big part of paper conservation is minimizing the damage. This, it's almost as if I've practically removed it with the lead white, but most often the case is minimizing it. Because I do want to point out here, you're probably seeing how light the paper is here and here. It's still light after treatment. And that's because this is an object that couldn't withstand the type of treatment that would take to try to soften that kind of boundary change. We can wash paper to soften up what that's called differential degradation. The paper is degraded differently in that area than the other area. And that's because this paper was stored in a stack for a long, long time. And it was up against other paper that had just a different chemical component and they interacted with one another. So we can't always do everything we would like to do. But this piece, this is as good as it will get because the risk of washing this would compromise the graphite and how it's bound to the surface. It's a little too fragile to withstand that treatment. And this object, this drawing was treated because we do a lot of loans to other institutions. And this was part of an exhibition called Maine the Sublime. And this is in process of installation images. We go and we help with the installation. And it also traveled to the Cleveland Museum of Art. So the research that happens, Olana does the research for exhibitions at Olana, but they have a very, very extensive loan network, and there are many exhibitions happening concurrently. So my next one, just moving you up, there we go. One of the things that I like to tell people about the works on paper for collections, and especially here at Olana, is that the works really provide you a very intimate view to the artist and how their working process. And we know Church for his big, beautiful, monumental works, but I will admit I am very, very partial to his works that demonstrate his working process. And this is a sketchbook. It's tiny, it's about this big. And what I find incredible are his annotations and his descriptions of light effects. And you can see in this in the middle, it says light lazy purple and then splendid orange glow. And so he's building, this is his snapshot of what he's seeing when he's out in the field. And they can be detailed like this one, or they can be very simple and very abstract looking like these ones. And so working with the sketchbooks and his works on paper, you get to see this process and you get to start making connections to his other works. Church worked really extensively in just about every medium. He has, his graphites are gorgeous, his loose sketches are amazing, and then you have your oils on paper. So I love making the leap from that cloud study to this little cloud study. This as well is a small one. And you start seeing how he's working with the light play, and he realizes the composition in graphite. Then he goes to oil on paper, and then he moves on to like these really tight, larger pieces. And I'm partial to the oils on paper, and it's very rare for people to see a variety of them in one space. So I put together a little show of you seeing views from Olana, so you could get an idea of the light play that he's working through with his pieces. So just enjoy these. This one was one of the first sketches that I ever saw from the collection. And it always stuck with me because it was so different from all the other Olana paintings that I was familiar with. And I'm completely indebted to Joyce Zucker, the painting conservator who was here when I started. I learned a lot about oils on paper through her, and she had worked with the collection for some 35 years. I was very sad when she retired, but we spent a lot of time discussing the oils on paper, how they degrade, what's happening with the oil binder as it's going through the paper, how do we come up with good exhibition parameters? Because oil paint is quite light stable, but the support is very light sensitive. And so you can see on an oil like this one, where you have all of this is the raw paper ground. How do I compromise the exhibition standards for a painting, which are up here, with the exhibition requirements for a piece of paper, which is like down here? How do we meet that so this artwork can be enjoyed? So it's always figured out on a case-by-case basis, but Joyce's input was invaluable in my getting to know this collection. And so I like jumping from this one to Church's photograph collection, because see the similarities compositionally. This is a photograph, a view from Olana, and Church was an innovator. And Church, at the time that Church is working, there's amazing technological advances happening in photography. And he has hundreds and hundreds of photographs in the collection. So while my attention goes to the oils on paper, I quickly, when I start looking at photos, I start coming over to the photography side of things, because that's how I started out in the field of conservation. So this is the view from Olana, and Church traveled extensively. So a lot of his pieces, this is a relatively large scale photograph. It's about 14 by 17. And this is in Jamaica. And I just wanted to show you the gentleman in the top hat in this photograph. Could you imagine being in Jamaica dressed like this? And I can tell you that the photography equipment to produce this photograph at that time would have taken up 3 suitcases. I couldn't imagine traveling through the wilderness with that kind of, with all the materials it takes to create this photograph that has an incredible amount of detail. So photography is something that Will and I have been working with a fair bit. This is another example from Church's collection. And I'm happy. I'm always excited to be able to show people micrographs of photographs, because again, you see this beautiful image, and then you dive right into it. Here's the gentleman with the horse right here. That's this gentleman here. And then this is a detail of his hand. And when I look at a photograph, this is what I need. This is the level I need to be at to start identifying what kind of photograph it is, because the type of photograph influences how we look after it. So I thought ending on photography would be a good segue for Will and I to maybe talk a little bit about other collection initiatives that we have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm sure everybody on here, 58 people, enjoyed that as much as I did. It's such a treat, and an all too rare treat, to get to see this incredibly fascinating profession. It sends me right back to undergrad, when I briefly did being a conservator and getting to play with infrared reflectivity and to understand these things that are usually a PowerPoint slide or on the other side of a tour floor room as physical objects that have lives of their own. So it's a privilege to get to look at these things through your eyes, and a useful preview, as you say, of things to come. We're thinking a lot about photography these days, so a privilege to look at a micrograph, to look into the ways photography might have been useful to Frederick Church. So everyone who's on the line, please do feel free to send in questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I've certainly got a few, so I'll get us started. I know there's one kind of elephant in the room when we talk about the paper collections of Olana and their conservation challenges. And I wonder if you maybe could tell all of us a little bit about this thing we know as the Nehan Zoo.
So the Nehan, can I share my screen
Please,
again?
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so I want to share the screen again, because I do have a picture for everybody. I can. So when I came to People's Island, I inherited this fantastic folder from my predecessor. The Nehansu is this very large scroll here, you see in the court hall up the stairwell. And it hasn't been on display for a long time. I believe it was taken down for a large HVAC renovation, like a heating, air conditioning renovation that happened. So it's here in East Wing storage. I've only been able to peek at it in person. I've been working from records. There was an amazing, tremendous exchange of information. People from Japan came over to talk about how this piece could be conserved, because it's very, very large. And being an Eastern piece, there's traditions of Eastern conservation and Western conservation, and Western conservation borrows very much from Eastern conservation, but the approach to an artifact, you have to come together about originality, original materials, and sacrificial things, because scrolls like this were often, they are remounted very frequently in their lifetime. When I say, I'm a conservator, I say frequently, I say it's remounted like 3 times over 400 years. That's frequent in my world. So how to conserve something like this so that it can go back into display, but then you've conserved it and you want to protect it for preservation, and you also want to protect that investment into the conservation. So you have to come up with a plan for exhibition down the way. I just have the picture of the court hall for with the installation, the Chuck Close installation over here on the left, with the tapestry, because the tour floor has been used for contemporary art installations, which is something I really like. I think it really invigorates things. And the reality is the Nehansu hung there for 100 years with Frederick Church, but that's not the best thing for it once it's conserved. So how are we going to come up with, we want to get it conserved. The great thing is that now we have specialists in North America. I've spent a lot of time in my own professional development. I went to Japan to learn how to make paper 10 years ago. I recently did a scroll mounting workshop. I'm by no means an Eastern art specialist, but we have some very wonderful Eastern art specialists that we could partner with to get this piece conserved and back up. I'd love to see that in my career tenure here. And I'd love to be part of that, because I think it would be a wonderful teamwork. And then, like I said, we would figure out how would we work with it on the tour floor? Because again, it's very easy to say, oh, well, we'll put it up for 2 years and then we'll take it down for 2 years. Putting something like that up and taking it down is a lot of work. So you have to work that into everything else that everybody's working on, because, you know, there's really never enough hours in the day, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say everybody at the Olana partnership is behind you 100% and hoping to bring that work back despite its many challenges someday, especially our board chair emeritus, Kay Toll, who has made that a pet cause. So someday we'll get there. And I'll mention also the upcoming contemporary installation that will refer to that void at the heart of Olana, this work that we need to get you down here to do a little commission report on a lovely Vic Muniz contemporary photographic print that's a part of our upcoming exhibition. So more to come in that space, but glad to give you all a little peek into the past. We've got some good questions coming in here now. One is just to say, please tell her how great she is. So I will do so. Everybody thoroughly enjoyed it as expected. We're all big fans of Michele Phillips, who I might mention in this member event is such a good advocate for Olana's collections that she herself is a member of the Olana partnership. So much appreciated. some questions about photography. Do you have pet theories about whether any of these photographs might have actually been taken by Frederick Edwin Church, or do you think we're always one step removed?
Well, I wonder, I don't know, because he was such a collector. I mean, we have the William James Stillman collection, and he was an intern of Church's early on. And then he's known as an intern to the Hudson River School. And we have a really extensive collection of his works. And Church was a very avid collector. I can't imagine he didn't. I can't imagine him just leaving that to other people. I can't imagine he didn't practice with it. I'm just not sure how we would figure that out. That's what's difficult. And I mean, and it's an incredible volume that we have. We have Stillman's, I'm not sure if it's complete, but we have multiples of the Athens Atlas that Stillman did. And this is what's behind me right now, is I pulled a couple Stillman photographs because I wanted a screen. I didn't want you to see a blank monitor in the back. So that's just a screen grab off of a Stillman from the Athens piece. I can actually handle it because it's encapsulated. But so this is what's interesting for the Stillman collection for us, is that I'm just being very careful. Now understand, I do not have gloves on because it's in a polyester sleeve. Nobody get mad at me.
Yeah.
So this is an example, and you can, I don't know if you can tell by the edges, it's a raw piece, like it's a raw photograph. It was never mounted. So it's somewhere along the lines of what I would consider a proof from the Stillman collection, rather than a finished piece. And Church has a lot of those. And I'm really wondering, like, how did those get into his collection? And I'd love to do more analysis. There's a level of analytical investigation to be had because they're not all albumin. They're platinotypes, they're carbon prints. And so we have this repertoire to add. If we could do this analysis of the collection, we could add to the grand raisonné of Stillman and just photograph techniques in general. Like we have it's an amazing, I would call it a study collection, but it has more research value than just to us. It's a research value to everybody, with how, everything's so digital now. People are paying a lot more attention to that analog photography, which is, as I said, it's what inspired me to become a conservator. I started off going to art school to become a photographer, became a printmaker, art historian, and then a conservator, because it was all about methods and materials for me. And you can't get more methods and materials than photography. Sure. There's just, when you say a photograph is black and white, I'm just like, okay, so what 20 different processes do you mean?
Yeah, it's nice to have somebody in the collection who poses so many interesting technical challenges. This William James Stillman was experimenting with all these methods and materials, and particularly fascinating that we have such a trove of Stillman because of what we know from the historical record, that they did not have the smoothest of relationships, Church and Stillman. There are some tensions between the two. So why is Church such a careful archivist of Stillman's work? So
yeah,
much to explore. A technical question here. People were fascinated by the way you dealt with the lead white heightening.
Yes.
And they're wondering if what you showed, that magical transformation, is the end of the story. Can we stabilize it and make sure it won't darken again, or is it just going to have to be touched up again in 20 years?
So I would say, so why it changed, I was really curious why it changed in certain places and not in others. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry I didn't show you a photograph of the verso of that drawing, because if you see on the back of the drawing, I can tell the 4 different pages that were up against it. Yeah. So the paper is a sponge, but paper also, as it degrades, off gases, acid, and other gases. And so it shouldn't happen again because it's now in a proper enclosure and it's protected from chemical pollutants. So it shouldn't happen again.
Okay, so it's not just that the material itself is inherently transitory, but it's about what it was exposed to. Okay. And then,
the other addition to that is when you're treating with a gel, rather than just applying with the wet solution, And the reason why I wasn't applying with a wet solution is I didn't want it to penetrate past the paint layer. I wanted to sit on top of the paint layer. And while I reduce most of that, methyl cellulose actually is an adhesive. I use it as a glue in other situations. And even though you're removing it, you remove most of it, there is some of it still there. And it's almost creating like a little fine layer of protection. It's almost like a little varnish. People have talked about that, the pros and cons of that, because the worry is like, are you getting all the peroxide off? You want to make sure, because if you're leaving if there's a film layer there, you want to make sure that you're pulling up all the chemistry that you applied. So there are people who are focusing on that research.
Understood.
The pros and cons. Everything's a compromise.
Yeah, I
conservation.
Hear you. Lots of challenges like that. You have to navigate what's best for the object, what's best for exhibitability, all of these considerations that you're weighing every day. We have another question from one of our board members, Dr. Ricky Lark, who, like me, is a big fan of the Winterthur Museum and Library, and we both saw a recent post they made about toxic books, these emerald green arsenic dyes, and wondering if you have come across any of these poison books in the Olana collection or in other state historic sites for that matter.
So I haven't, but it's been an issue in conservation because for a long time we were for a long time. In the 60s and before that, fumigation of books was very common because book lice, which is an awful term, they're posids, there's these tiny little bugs that eat the mold on paper and then subsequently end up eating the paper, and insects. Books were often fumigated. So we're dealing with that. That posting was specifically about the material that was inherently in the book being toxic. But because I have to work with so much toxic things to begin with, I kind of lump it under it's just like a fumigated book. So it's all about handling protocols. And is it hurting anything if it's sitting on the shelf? Like think about asbestos. Asbestos hurts you if it becomes friable. And so a book on a shelf if you're not handling it, but it's really important that people know what they're handling. So it hasn't come across. I have no records that we've done any fumigation of the Olana library. And the work on the Olana library has been very hands off, which is quite nice. Like other than making sure that things are banded together properly and handling's kept to a minimum. But again, the library is another research direction. We have a scholar, Mary Roberts, who did a webinar a couple of weeks ago. I know she wants to come back and look at the books, to look at how they were used, to see where they open, because the use of a book can tell a lot about how it influenced an artist. You can see whether it's a well-worn book, and the library was very treasured. It wasn't thumbed through a lot. So we have church's use on that.
I guess we have to get creative in looking for those subtle signs of use as opposed to extensive annotation that we might wish for that would show what people are reading and learning from. So we're not so lucky dealing with the legacy of the church family here in some places that have these heavily marked up books. But Mary Roberts, one of those, and certainly my colleague Allegra and I are very interested in all these stories in the Historic Library of Olana, and hoping to start drawing out these historic books that relate to the themes of exhibitions. So the Gems of Brazil of Martin Johnson Heed and Brazil and the Brazilians on the shelf at Olana. So many connections like that.
And Cosmos.
Yes, of course, Cosmos, the book that's currently on loan to the Smithsonian American Art Museum because of the importance of the Historic Library of Olana. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that might be near the end of our time. There's one more, but I'll quickly get that one in from Annie. Okay. Can you get rid of the smell of mold on books? And then I'll save room for one more from me.
Can you get rid of the smell of mold on books? Okay, so don't put them in boxes with kitty litter. I know people have been have read about that. And ionizing machines are another thing that people use, but ionizing machines it inspires oxidation of paper, so you don't want to use that. There's something called zeolite, which is, I think it acts like kitty litter, but it's not kitty litter. The problem with kitty litter is the dirt and dust associated with it. But there is a material called zeolite that you can put your book in a box with this material. It takes a long time. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes days and weeks, and it depends on the smell. And that can remove the smell from the books. The other thing is your books might just need a good vacuuming. A lot of mold is sitting on the top edge in the dust. So if you keep your books tidy, lots of dusting. This is why bookcases without glass fronts are a nightmare. Always keep them cabineted. But yeah, there is a way to do it. It's just not going to come out completely gone. And it usually means that you have moisture somewhere. If it's really, really strong, you might have a high humidity issue, and you should start running a dehumidifier in the area of the books. If you have your books in a basement, you definitely have to have a dehumidifier running.
Okay. That's helpful. On a similar note, I thought it might be fun to end with a more general question about the care of works on paper of a more modest nature, not necessarily the work of Frederick Church or the like, but if any of our attendees have a watercolor in the attic, a drawing, do you have any general guidelines for caring for works on paper at home?
Oh yeah. So preservation framing, you've heard an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Preservation framing, investing in a framer who knows how to do proper mounting and does not use tape, pressure sensitive tapes. They know how to mount without putting adhesives, or they know how to use the right adhesives. And then the good quality materials. You want your mat board to be acid free, lignin free. If you're putting it on display, you must put it under UV glazing, whether it be plexiglass, acrylic in my world, I call it, but plexiglass is the trade name, or glass. You need to have that UV protection. It's like going out in the sun if you're a redhead, without sunscreen on.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, it is only sunscreen. So you really should rotate your collection, and it should never have direct sunlight on it. It needs to be in a room with low light. Follow the metric we have at Olana on the tour floor. We have shades so that we can still enjoy a view to the outside, but it's blocking the light. They're not everybody's favorite, but they're very, very effective. Instead of blackening out the room, you can still enjoy a room with a window, and it cuts down the light by about 80%. So preservation framing. And then the other thing is, if it's in storage, making sure it's well supported and has good quality materials on the back of it and on the front of it. So, because a lot of people have large things that are unmounted, they put them between cardboard. Cardboard's the worst chemical thing that you can put up against an artwork. The corrugation will translate chemically into the paper, and you'll get striations down the road. So it's all about good quality paper. So sandwich it between two pieces of good quality paper, a couple more pieces, and then the cardboard. And you're giving it a buffer, because the rigidity is important, and there's not a lot of inexpensive rigid materials out there. So, yeah.
Okay, now we're all going to go run off to the attic and get that painting
Yes.
from Grandma out of the cardboard. So you've put the fear of God in us about that, but very helpful.
Sorry.
Thank you so much, Michelle. This was really tremendously helpful.
Great.
A different kind of webinar for the Olana Partnership. We greatly appreciate it. All thank you for being members, and please stay tuned for more upcoming virtual programs. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.